This July 12th, 2023. Welcome. And I'll call the meeting to order. And I'm looking at the agenda. We have a number of business items and then three important information items. So thank you for being here. The agenda is as posted. Unless there's any disagreement, I will take the agenda as approved and move to the council minutes from June 28th, 2023. Is there a motion and a second to approve the minutes?
Move approval.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion or corrections? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The minutes are approved. And this is the point of the meeting. We have an opportunity for members of the public to address the council on matters not on the agenda. And nobody has signed up in advance. And I see no one rushing to the podium, so I assume there are no comments at this meeting today, which brings us to the consent agenda. Is there a motion and a second to approve the consent business items?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. All right, any discussion?
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
even though it's a
Judy.
consent agenda, I just want to congratulate the City of Independence for moving forward their 2040 comprehensive plan, the comprehensive sewer plan, and, congratulate Mayor Johnson, Mark, the city administrator. They, did a lot of work to get it to this point, and I just do want to thank Freya Thamman for all of her great work as the sector rep. It was a lot of work in all good ways, and tonight is a big deal for the City of Independence, so I just wanted to make note of that.
Thank you for bringing attention to that issue. Any other comments? All right, hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? The consent business items have been approved. So on to reports of our standing committees, starting with the Community Development Committee. Councilmember Lilligren.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, council members. This is business item 2023-138. It's to award nearly $2.4 million in livable communities tax-based revitalization account grants to support 12 redevelopment sites in 5 different cities. The council received 18 applications in this round of tax-based revitalization account grants, totaling $3.9 million in requests. The council staff reviewed the proposed applications following the evaluation criteria in the approved fund distribution plan. Council staff also collaborated with staff from Minnesota Department of Employment and Economic Development, or DEED, the council's largest brownfield funding partner in the metro area, and staff from the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency to review applications and receive feedback. Projects that met minimum scoring criteria and other funding considerations are recommended for funding. Projects are located in the cities of Excelsior, Fridley, Minneapolis, St. Louis Park, and St. Paul. Upon completion of these projects, the 12 recommended projects are expected to result in 19 acres of contamination cleanup, an annual tax base increase of $3.3 million, 1,000 full-time equivalent jobs added and retained, and 170 new affordable housing units, including 71 units affordable at households earning below 30% of area median income, 64 units at 50% of area median income, 35 units 60% of AMI, and over $326 million of leveraged private investment. So, Mr. Chair, I move that the Metropolitan Council award 12 tax-based revitalization account grants totaling $2,369,600, as shown in Table 1 of the business item, and to authorize our Executive Director of Community Development to execute the grant agreements on behalf of the Council.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That action is approved. There are no reports from the Environment Committee and no reports from the Management Committee. There are 2 reports from the Transportation Committee. And Councilmember Chambliss, is that you?
That would be me. Thank you,
Yay.
Mr. Chair.
Okay.
Mr. Chair and council members,
Business item number 2023-132, same week, is regarding a design partnership with the Minnesota Department of Transportation related to Metro F-Line BRT project. In summary, the F-Line will mostly operate on roadways owned and operated by the Minnesota Department of Transportation, specifically Trunk Highway 47, which is also University Avenue, and Trunk Highway 65, Central Avenue. Therefore, MnDOT is a key partner in the F-Line project. MnDOT recently completed a planning study that recommended design changes to Trunk Highway 65 to improve safety, support F-Line speed and reliability, and improve travel options for people walking and biking. To begin the design of these future improvements on Trunk Highway 65, Metro Transit will incorporate MnDOT funding preliminary design work of Trunk Highway 65 into the F-Line engineering contract 22P400. This will benefit both Metro Transit and MDOT by streamlining resolution of design issues in the central corridor through the concurrent design of complementary BRT and roadway improvements. Therefore, Mr. Chair, I move that the Metropolitan Council authorize the regional administrator to negotiate and execute work order number 12, 22100-3L, issued under 22103, the Master Partnership Contract, MPC, with the Minnesota Department of Transportation. Under the work order, the council will receive approximately $2,400,000 from Minnesota Department of Transportation for preliminary design services for Trunk Highway 65 to be completed in coordination with the Metro F-Line project.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? All right, hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That motion's carried. Councilmember Chambliss.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, council members. Business item number 2023-125, same week, is regarding an award of an engineering and construction administration services contract for a Metro F-Line BRT project. As the F-Line project advances from the planning phase to the engineering phase this summer, Metro Transit requires a consultant to provide engineering and construction administration services for the F-Line project and associated MnDOT roadway improvements. A request for proposals was issued on January 10th, 2023, and there were 21 registered plan holders for this project. The council received 2 proposals. An evaluation panel and technical advisory group representing council staff and agency partners recommended Kimley Horn as the most technically qualified proposer. Next, a Metro Transit negotiating panel negotiated pricing and determined the final negotiated costs to be fair and reasonable, recommending Kimley Horn's proposal as the most advantageous to the council. Of the total proposed contract value, approximately $2.4 million will be provided to the council by MnDOT for preliminary design work along Trunk Highway 65. The Office of Equity and Equal Opportunity set a disadvantaged business enterprise goal of 16% and determined that Kimley Horn has met DBE requirements of this contract. Therefore, Mr. Chair, I move that the Metropolitan Council authorize the regional administrator to award and execute contract 22P400 with Kimley Horn and Associates, Inc., for engineering and construction administration services for the Metro F-Line project and associated roadway improvements in the amount not to exceed $17,382,828.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? All right, hearing none. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? That motion carried. Thank you all. We have one other item of other business, and that is business item 2023-148, the appointment of Metropolitan Council members to standing committees, the appointment of the vice chair, the appointment to advisory committees, commissions, and board assignments. And this is under the council bylaws. The council chair shall recommend to the council for approval, usually at the first regular meeting in February and as soon thereafter as possible, for each standing committee. This action was taken on March 8th, 2023, but due to the 2023 redistricting process, reappointments to council committees are needed following the appointment of council members by Governor Tim Walz on June 27th, 2023. Committee member assignments are important to continue the council's business, and the council membership and leadership are generally and actually are reviewed annually by the chair in accordance with our bylaws. So although this is an action we're taking mid-year, it is really because of the redistricting and the reappointment of all the council. So therefore, I move that the Metropolitan Council approve the appointment of council members to standing and advisory committees and commissions, and the appointment of Reva Chambliss as vice chair of the Metropolitan Council. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, thank you. Any discussion? There's a lot of debate, but Councilmember Chambliss said we should have debate. So, with that, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Thank you very much. And thank you again for your willingness to continue to serve on this council. And I know we had the last meeting, had a wonderful ceremony. I want you all to know that Councilmember Lindstrom and I, with an appropriate witness, had our own ceremony virtually, but now we're all.
I'm special.
Very special, and you are special, and we all are duly in our places legally, so thank you. With that, we have the real substance of the meeting after our business items is a few presentations from our Community Development Division, and the greenhouse gas strategy planning tool is something I know I talked a lot about at the legislature, and whether it's part of legislation or not, we're doing it, and I just really am thrilled about that. So Lisa, you're going to set this up? And, all right, great, welcome.
Thank you, council members, Mr. Chair. I'm Lisa Barajas, Executive Director of the Community Development Division, she, her pronouns. It's my pleasure to be in front of you today to give a brief introduction to this work that our team in community development has had underway for a number of years, and really was just a glimmer in my crazy brain back in 2014 when we were writing and adopting Thrive MSP 2040 about how we could actually provide a regional inventory for local units of government, and even better, a strategy planning tool that would help local units of government expand their capacity and their ability to actually make a difference in their own emissions and their own planning decisions and their own operational decisions, that collectively as a region that we could meet our greenhouse gas emissions reductions goals. So kind of going back to 2040, I just wanted to give some baseline on where this all started and how we got here and how long in the making it's been. And in Thrive MSP 2040, under our sustainability outcome, we had this idea that we should be doing this work in some fashion without really knowing how it was going to end up, but that really directly that the council would develop, collect, and distribute information about climate change, including energy and climate data, and that we would be sharing that across the region. We had, at that time, regional indicators data for communities that were participating in Green Step cities as sort of a prototype for this work, and we were thinking, how do we build that bigger for the region, for all communities in the region, too? We also council gave us direction to work with the state of Minnesota on developing a regional greenhouse gas emissions inventory as well, and then to provide technical assistance to local units of government in this work. So it sounds pretty straightforward and like a pretty easy direction, but like I said, many years in the making, and I'll let Mauricio talk to you more about that in a moment, and somehow it went that direction instead. Oh, this is left-handed, I see. Okay, just some more recent work. work. The council just in December adopted its own climate action work plan that is meant to direct our own actions as it relates to the council's greenhouse gas emissions in its operations and its resilience of the facilities that we are responsible for. This was a large undertaking with staff from across all of the divisions of the council, not just planning staff, but operational staff, and in a variety, in all of the divisions, but in a variety of locations and working in different parts of the council's work, really to pull out these strategies that were going to help drive down our emissions. We are a big energy user in the region, and we do have a large impact, and part of the council's strategy in the climate work has always been to lead by example first, and then to support others in doing that work as well. And so this is really our putting all of our things in one basket and saying, this is how we're doing this collectively. We've had so much work happening within our divisions for a number of years, since early 2000s, to really be more energy efficient in our operations, to build more resilience into into all of our building and planning for our different assets and facilities, but really have been done individually and not collectively as an organization. So something that we were really working toward, and I think we're successful in accomplishing, and now we're working toward that implementation of this work plan as well. And then, as you are all aware, as we've been continuing to have conversations around the 2050 Regional Development Guide, one of our working regional goals that you all have contributed to drafting are leading on addressing climate change, and that we have mitigated greenhouse gas emissions and have adapted to ensure that our communities and systems are resilient to climate impacts. And finally, we have a lot of work underway with, or beginning to get underway now, related to our long-range planning work, with a grant that we are currently in the process of negotiating our grant agreement with the EPA on, but it is for a regional greenhouse gas emissions reduction plan. The primary requirements of this plan are to have a regional greenhouse gas inventory and to identify quantified strategies that as a region will drive down emissions across that region. So this grant is an excellent opportunity to expand our capacity to do work that we were hoping to include in our regional development guide as already as it was, but also to do this collectively with with regions across the nation. We are one of, I believe, 79 total regions across the nation that are receiving one of these grants and doing this work, but also we will have a very strong partnership with the state of Minnesota, who also is conducting the statewide statewide greenhouse gas emissions reduction plan at the same time. So really close collaboration and a lot of work that's meant to get done very quickly within a short time frame in the next year, and then a year and a half after that, in order to have entities within the region be eligible to compete for a phase 2 round of EPA funding of over $4 billion for implementation of prioritized strategies in those plans. So we're really excited about these opportunities, and the whole baseline for all of this work is the work that Mauricio is going to be talking about today. We're really excited for the launch of the strategy planning tool. Not just because it's been a long time coming and a lot of tears and blood and sweat, and hopefully not, but technologically have gone in a pixelated form into this work, but also because we know, as we've been working with local units of government around the region, that they have been really looking forward to having this resource available to them, because it greatly expands their abilities to step into this work with more confidence and to not have to feel like they have to figure it out and take on what can be some pretty kind of technically difficult work to step into if you're not already somebody in the field or someone who is, a climate scientist, to understand, well, what does it mean for me in my work to do something different? So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mauricio and step back while he presents, and I will step away so you can go ahead.
Okay. Thank you so much. So right now I'm going to explain a little bit about what is this greenhouse gas scenario planning, greenhouse gas strategy planning tool that we've been working for the last 3 years. And it really, a good way to summarize it is this question about what should we do to mitigate our greenhouse gas emissions. what should local governments do to mitigate their greenhouse gas emissions? It's a big question, and there's a lot of information out there, as you might imagine. Everyone will prescribe things such as electric vehicles to telework to compact development. So what is that we need to be doing? What is that a local government should be doing? And that is actually guided by data and by the best science that we can find. So for this, we knew that we needed to partner with academia because they've been thinking about these questions. And we were very lucky to find a great research partner on the Sustainable Healthy Cities Network. This was a network of researchers from different academic institutions. The lead principal investigator at the moment was a professor at the University of Minnesota. Later she moved, her name is Anu Ramaswamy. Later she moved to University of Princeton, and we continued to work with her on that role. And really to bring the diverse expertise from multiple sectors and multiple disciplines. So we had people from civil engineering, but also people from transportation and people from just more urban and regional planning. So it was a great kind of multidisciplinary endeavor. On the other hand, we also wanted to include a lot of our own expertise as a staff and to this tool. So we had to consult with, of course, other divisions of the council, in particular with the Metropolitan Transportation Services and all the work that they've done on transportation forecasting, as well as the Metro Transit Division, and make sure that whatever we put in this tool, that is something that they feel comfortable in terms of assumptions, or at least they can live with in terms of assumptions. And so there was a lot of deliberation that happened. And lastly, there's a very significant component of this was the stakeholder engagement. So actually having this conversation with who will be the users of this tool, local governments, and making sure that this is something that they will find useful and that is going to meet their needs, and the strategies that we're contemplating and that we're including in this tool are things that they will find very useful. So after all this work, we are finally releasing the greenhouse gas strategy planning tool. And what is this? So now that I explained what is it, although I should also mention, in essence, it's a model. So it really is just like taking a lot of data sets that we have at the Metropolitan Council and other like data sources at the federal level, at the state level, and combining those, putting them to answer this question of what should we do for reducing greenhouse gas emissions for local governments. So the example I like to give is a very basic one. You all know how, like, if we change an incandescent light bulb for a an incandescent light bulb for a fluorescent light bulb, that's just gonna save energy in a household, right? So if we change all the light bulbs in a household, then we can see energy savings of this much. And then if you change all the light bulbs in the whole city, you're gonna see energy savings of this much. So you can see how you can start with micro assumptions that then you scale up, and then you can make assumptions about what happens at the city level or the city scale. And it's a tool for local governments, as I mentioned. And we find that this type of work for local governments can be overwhelming, particularly for medium-sized and smaller local governments. You go to cities like Minneapolis and St. Paul, and they have already very developed metrics and work on this front, but not so much for your middle size. So this really takes away some of the technical burden of having to do all these calculations, which really can overwhelm the city and make it so that they really don't feel like taking action, or they don't want to know, or they don't even know where to start. So it really helps to catalyze that. And the people who will be using this tool are, for example, sustainability coordinators. Some cities already have these people in their staff, people that are dedicated sustainability coordinators, and this is their job to actually see how they can move the city operations and the city planning towards reducing greenhouse gas emissions. In some places, you see planners doing this type of work. And in some cities, you will see just elected officials who really want to advocate or push this type of climate planning forward. So they will be using this research to make the case and to really identify priorities. So what is that a local government can do with this? Mostly the way I will summarize it is that it supports decision-making. This is a tool that really condenses a lot of information into something that a local government can digest. And this information is used for things such as climate action plans, sometimes, specific sections of a comprehensive plan, but a lot of cities have worked on climate action plans, and we'll start seeing more and more of those. And it helps to identify priorities. So, for example, for some cities, what we found through this tool is that perhaps transit is not a very viable option in the short term, at least, because they don't have the type of the population to justify it, but they can focus on other things that will actually help them meet their goals. And it really is something to save time and resources. So it really comes to our kind of reason of existing in the Met Council is just collaborating and saving time and resources by doing work like these big endeavors, like actually tackling them together. So now a little bit more detail on the tool. The tool is kind of focus on 3 sectors: building, energy, transportation, and one that is related to conservation and carbon stock. I like to just say that is about trees, because that makes the point easier. But when it comes to energy buildings, we know that we have a lot of room for making our buildings more sustainable. There's been a lot that has happened in recent years, but there's still a lot of technologies that we can implement to reduce the footprint of buildings. And there's a lot of new technologies that are gonna come up in the next years that we can start implementing. In terms of transportation, we of course know what works. We know that transit, when we do transit right, that it's gonna reduce the amount of driving happening in communities. And it also makes making communities more walkable. All these things are gonna make people drive less, so it will reduce the frequency of trips. But also, if you do smart planning, people will be able to fulfill their needs without having to drive very far away. So shorter and less frequent trips, and that's the key. And then when it comes to conservation and carbon stock, not all is about releasing greenhouse gas emissions, but it's also about what can take greenhouse gas emissions away. And especially in our more rural and agricultural communities, there's big potential to preserve forested lands that is gonna pay off in terms of carbon, meeting our carbon goals. And the tool actually considers 17 strategies, which you might see in a moment. And I think a really important point to make here is how does this actually forecast? Because this is something intended to identify strategies for the next decades, right? So for 2030, 2040, what are the strategies that we should be doing? And the good news for us is that we already do a lot of forecasting work for different things, so for population, for demographics, for transportation. So it's more of a matter of putting the pieces together, and you can start getting these insights about greenhouse gas emissions. So this is a preview of the tool. Hopefully, I'll be able to show you the live tool. This is what it's going to look like. It's basically city staff goes to our website, our website, and they're going to find a menu of options. They can select their city. They're going to find a menu of options, some of the strategies that they can use are already bundled. Like in this case, like when the picture that you're seeing here, it already bundles strategies in a way that is convenient. But you can also customize the strategies to a more fine scale if you want to. So what you're seeing here is what we call a wet chart. That's the image on the right. And it basically shows the proportion of emissions that come from different sectors. You can see there that in 2018, most of the emissions from the city of Richfield were coming from the building energy sector, and the second one was transportation. But after implementing some of the strategies that the tool provides, you start seeing the decrease there in emissions. A key thing to understand here is that black line that you see on the chart, that is what we call business as usual. So that means that if you don't select any of these strategies, that's where your emissions will be. But if you select the strategies, you can actually lower that and meet your goal. And the ultimate goal when it comes to climate is carbon neutrality, where you actually are not releasing greenhouse gas emissions, because that's what's causing climate change. So in this other example, we have city of Minneapolis. Here we can see a more customized portfolio strategies where they selected retrofitting all homes. That might be not a realistic goal, but because retrofitting all homes might be a real challenge in the next 20 years, but it really shows what the potential is, and I think that's the point that we try to make is how do you set priorities? Well, you need to understand what you can gain from different strategies. And here we have an example of a more rural community, and you can see here that our tool also provides these insights as a table, so that is really user-friendly. It's really easy for users to go and get this information and start using it for their climate action plans or their comprehensive plans. I really need to emphasize how unique this is. It really is something that you haven't seen in any other metropolitan organization like ours. And I'm pretty sure that it's going to grab some attention, because these are the type of resources that accelerate climate action. When you don't have to do all these calculations, which really are overwhelming, you can really move into implementation and actually have the conversations that need to happen with your community. So that's it for the presentation. I'm not sure if we can do the live demo. We might. It's happening. There you go.
Somebody behind the curtain is making it happen.
Okay. Now I'm gonna grab the mouse here and gonna reduce here some of the, yep. You can see here the live tool. You can see how someone can go and select strategies. They can go and select the city. So here we have the city of Egan selected. I'm going to change to the city of Edina. And that is going to automatically refresh the graph. And it's going to show the impact of those strategies in real time. Or if they want, they can customize strategies. So to select a more customized portfolio of actions. A lot of math went into this, so I really want to shout out for my colleagues here at the council, because they did amazing work in doing this in-house. It's not something that usually we've seen other organizations doing in-house, but actually crunching the numbers to this level and actually producing a web application, something that at least I'm very proud of our team. You can see here more information in the About page. You will see just more context on why is the Metropolitan Council doing this work, as well as who participated in this work, and some next steps with this research. In the methodology page, you're gonna see more detailed information about how the calculations are happening. And part of the goal of this tool is to be pretty transparent. So for anyone to be able to go and understand how the calculations are happening and to have this dialogue with our communities if they feel like something has to be changed or if they feel like something is in the methodology could be improved, that we're open and accessible to have that dialogue. This is not something that you can get from maybe a proprietary tool. This is something that is open and ready for people to come and be part of the endeavor. So finally, here's a link to all of our climate action resources on the .org website. And yeah, that's it for this. And I'm very excited to take all your questions. I don't know, Lisa, if you're...
This is really exciting. And I know, we have some questions, but I'm going to jump in as to just a comment and a quick question. I mean, I think the goal here is to actually have some policies adopted that would bend those curves down. And this is a tool that actually shows what you get for a city council or a small town council to actually take some action. So, if Edina or Egan or one of the towns we're picking on here were to pick some, let's just say, density or some kind of zoning effect or ban light bulbs, I'm not sure what it would be, but and then we got to measure. Are we going to be able to kind of track that? I mean, because I think getting the word out and then actually following up and understanding how are we affecting the carbon footprints around the metro? Is there a way to kind of is there a feedback loop on this?
Well, that's a part of the things that we want to do with this tool is to provide the personalized assistance that a community might need and develop those relationships, which I think are really important. So instead of just someone going and playing with this tool and we didn't hear about it, we want to actually encourage them to reach out and establish this connection, and we can use the tool with them, provide that type of assistance. I think it's really important. So use this as an opportunity to make new friends, I think. It's what I would say.
And I would add, part of the baseline of this work that Mauricio and the team have been building is the regional inventory of greenhouse gas emissions too. So, ideally over time, as we continue to update that every couple of years and update our inventory or our data improves, that we would be able to see, hopefully, that downward trajectory in time. And we haven't gotten to the point of figuring out, how do we want to learn or figure out what strategies local governments have adopted when they put them in place. I think that's sort of a future step because we've been working on this part here. But that's certainly something that we've been have had in mind is how do we then track progress going forward.
Lovely. All right, let's open it up. Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you. Okay, this is fascinating. A city person for 20-some years. This is great. So just a couple of quick questions. So are we working with the League of Cities, on the Green Step Cities program? Because, they're doing great work in getting cities to adopt certain things to move in that direction. So just about sharing information or partnering or at least being in the same lane as them?
Work with a lot of partners.
I'm sure.
Green Step Cities definitely has been a longtime partner in this work and actually was part of our Direction and Thrive to partner with the state of Minnesota's Green Step Cities program. We also know that there are a number of Climate Cities Coalition and other groups and groupings of cities around the region that we have been engaging through as well, and watersheds have also been engaged in this work as part of bringing cities together in those collaborative conversations.
That's awesome. And I do know that to be part of the Green Step Cities program, you have to like adopt and become part of it. And I know for my city, that's been challenging for them. But with that said, this tool is, you know, they are doing things and they can, you know, use this tool to their advantage. One other, just a series of just rapid fire quick questions. So like, you know, the Minnesota Chamber has for a long time had their Energy Smart program with Centerpoint Energy and Excel. So is there a way in the future to push this out as a tool that a business owner or business could use for our campus or something like that? Or is there something already existing like that?
Well, I think that it's, for the scale that we made this is for the city, and to try to like scale it down to maybe a different unit, like a business, that will be a potentially a very like big endeavor. But I mean, it is possible to take some of the good insights that we got from this tool and put them to use for different research projects. I think that if people are interested, then the research team will be really excited to, you know, see collaboration and support anyone wanting to get the most out of this tool.
And the reason I say that is, you know, some of our communities have big industrial, commercial areas, right? And so, and some of them have been there for a long time. And certainly some of them are forward-thinking and progressive and are working on this. But it's just, you know, cities don't always do not control what private sector does. But it's, you know, it's just that partnering and working together on it, which is really part of the comp plan situation. And then also, I don't think cities, maybe cities can mandate these strategies. I don't know, because the legislature controls some of that too. And I don't know if we know if there are incentives out there, but, you know, especially for the communities that, you know, some are full adopters. They're doing it, and others are there, but they're not quite there. And some, their communities push back against this. So, you know, whatever, we can also, first of all, data speaks to people. You know, it's facts. It's not politics. It's not theory. So that will be helpful. But it's just trying to help get some of those other cities over the hump if they're not quite there yet. And I really enjoyed listening to this because I thought about early on, Plymouth was one of the first that had some really serious tree preservation ordinances, and we were the first to ban phosphorus from commercial application on lawns and even commercial lawns in the city of Plymouth, and we got a lot of pushback. But when we talked to people about how much it would cost to take that back out of the water, then the Chamber of Commerce and those folks came along. But at that time, I didn't even have any idea that that would be a strategy or what that impact could be. We just knew trees were good. So I just like the fact that some of these things that have been in place for a while, now we can maybe, as a city, put some data and metrics behind it to say that, hey, if we have a development coming forward and this % of trees are preserved, not just because we set a number for the sake of setting a number, but you can say, well, here's what the impact would be. I think that also helps to communicate to the community why these things are important. And I think, the only last thing I had is so like the city of Edina, for example, I think they're pretty progressive in the things that they're doing. They're part of climate action and all the good things. How do we figure out what the baseline is of a city? How do we know what they're already doing? What is their baseline? How do you figure that out based on cities doing all kinds of things?
It is a real endeavor. I think that, first of all, you have to look at what are the main sources of greenhouse gas emissions, and that's going to be the electricity we use, the natural gas we burn, the cars we drive, and the wastewater we use, because that's also going to have like the the composing of organic matter is going to release emissions, and the solid waste. So once you list the main sources, each of these sources is going to have a very unique methodology to how you get to the emissions. So for transportation, then we have to rely on transportation models that we have. Then we need to make assumptions about what is the, for example, the fuel economy, what is the mileage per gallon that we're getting. And now it's getting complicated with electric cars, how we account for that. For electricity, we need to actually reach out to the utility company. not all utility companies are responsive, so then if we don't get data, we need to find alternative methods. So just to get the baseline, I think is the like biggest part of the effort. And that relates to the other project that we maintain, which is called our greenhouse gas inventory. It's just getting that baseline and getting it in a consistent way that's really gonna help communities. Now that this tool is at the release stage, we can focus again on like producing that baseline on a more consistent basis to communities, which they find really useful. I mean, they really need to, that's how they track their progress. That's how they ultimately know whether what they're doing is paying off in terms of emissions.
I think this is great, and I just have to say, people don't have to subscribe to it, they don't have to pay for it, they don't have to commit some sort of major budget expenditure around it. It's for them to use as they would see fit, and then whether they bring additional resources or not behind it would be their decision. I really like where you're going with this, so thank you for your hard work.
Really great, yeah. Councilmember Lilligren.
Oh, thanks. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks for presenting this work, Mauricio, and just congratulations to you, to your team, Lisa, to everyone across the enterprise who worked in this. I think it's amazing, and I agree with everything that Councilmember Johnson just said about how useful some of our local communities will find this. In the 2040 plan, we said we wanted to lead on this issue. I think this is an incredible example of leading on this, and I really appreciate, Mauricio, what you said. You said a lot of math went into what you just showed us, and as someone who's not really that much of a math person, I could tell that, and it's really amazing, and I agree. I think it's going to attract a lot of attention nationally and across the region. And you know, this is something that I feel like since I've been on this council, we've been wanting to do, is how to provide these kinds of tools to the local communities in the region. And I think this is a great example. And sort of to that, and building off what Councilmember Johnson was saying, how are we going to engage the communities around the metro in introducing this tool and how to use it? I mean, it looks like I could use it. It looks pretty amazingly simple, but how are we going to popularize it, socialize it, publicize it?
I think we have Mr. Chair, Councilmember Lilligren, I think we actually have already socialized quite a bit just through working with end users, and I'll let Mauricio talk more about that. But in our upcoming work, especially around the climate pollution reduction grants, where we have to work at a regional scale, that as we've been working with local units of government just on coordinating an application process together, we've been talking about, here's what we already have done. So we've been sharing, or in what we have upcoming as well. So we've been sharing what we have, how they can find it if they weren't already aware of that. And then we've been talking about our plans for updating this as well. And as we're working through both long-range, regional development guide policy, following that shared regional goal, as well as thinking about, what support we can provide to local units of government as part of what legislation now requires them to include in their plans. We've been sharing, like, we've already been working on this for you. We want you to know that this is a tool for you. So just in the communication pieces, we have that, and I know that we will have other things planned as well, and let Mauricio talk more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it goes back to what we talked earlier, that we cannot just expect people to go and find this. We have to be very proactive in getting this information to them. And I think that's a need that we have realized as a division, is that we need to do a proactive outreach when it comes to climate, to maintain those relationships. I think of climate as the ultimate silo breaker. At least this is something that happened throughout this work, is that for this we couldn't stay just at the community development. We really had to go and talk to transit. We really had to go and talk to MTS. We really had to work to go and talk to ES. So it really is something that forces us to work and as an organization, work together. And it's something that we're not seeing only with the tool. We saw that with the Climate Action Work Plan. So yeah, I think it's the same idea, that we have to go and knock on doors, and we have to go and find strategic cities that want to use this and that are committed, and support them and be there for them and make ourselves accessible. And yep.
Cool. Thank you for that, and Director Barajas, thanks for the the reference back to working on the climate pollution reduction grants, and this is going to be a natural sort of organizing tool or something to help advance this. And I suspect that having this tool in place already is really going to kind of put us in the lead in that cohort of cities as well. So great work. Then one other question, please, Mr. Chair. And I noticed, Miso, on slide 8, we were talking about the 3 areas, and in the transportation area, all of the references were to vehicles, vehicular transportation, and I get why in some ways, but I'm just wondering if there was any consideration or if there's any impact of exploring sort of active transportation or non-motorized transportation.
That is correct, and that is one thing where this is the approach that the researchers that we work in, this is their opinion that, unfortunately, if you think of like bicycling, you can quadruple the bicycling that is happening in Minneapolis, and that's just going to have a very, very tiny effect. That's just the nature of like how trip shifting, like mode shifting works. But I think the moral of the story is that we know that when you do planning that is more conducive of active modes of transportation, that's one of the best things that you can do in the long term. And we know this empirically because of other cities that actually have a more transit-oriented development that did not take like a very car-centric approach as we took in some cities in the Midwest, and actually where people walk a lot. Those cities, those regions tend to have much lower emissions per capita, and that's because people walk, and it has a lot of co-benefits. It's like benefits public health, it benefits air quality. So in short, the way that we accounted for that is through this idea of more compact development, the 5 Ds of planning that includes like density, diversity of land uses, distance to destinations and all that. And even then, it's sometimes like frustrating for me at least, because I wanted to see more of an impact from that, but it's really hard to change our existing system. So it really is like steering this big boat into the right direction and start thinking more about how we can put that on the center, as a center of our considerations.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks. Councilmember Carter, Tony Carter.
Thank you. This really is very, very exciting. And I know, as many have said already, our communities will consider it very, very useful. I'm excited about the opportunity that we have to share it and to make certain that it gets in front of and is tested by our various communities. So I'm glad to hear about the ways in which you're advancing that work. I also am excited about the manner in which it allows communities to explore multiple strategies and then to hone in on those that are most useful. Could you, or most immediate or most impactful, however they want to look at that, could you talk a little bit about how costs are built in to the tool and whether that's an incorporated step or if it is a further out practice that they will have to explore in order to make a determination of which strategies to employ when?
So, Councilmember Carter, the cost considerations are not in this version of the tool. It's something that could later be expanded. When it comes to, like, for example, dollar cost of implementing some of these strategies, that is not in the tool. As well as something that is missing is the equity considerations of the different strategies that we are presenting here. One of the strategies that they included in this was transportation pricing. So what happens if you increase the cost of driving? It could be that because of supply and demand that you see that that's going to reduce your emissions, right? However, how equitable is that, right? Who's gonna be most affected by that? So I think that cost and equity are exactly the questions that we should be asking ourselves now. Because it's not just about greenhouse gas emissions, it connects to the previous question, is we have all these other benefits, public health, all these other things, and if we just narrow our vision to greenhouse gas emissions, we miss a lot of like the good things that could come from considering these strategies or not considering these strategies.
Thank you. It's
Yeah.
certainly a very big step along the way in putting strategies in front of our communities that they then can use those questions to parcel out.
And Mr. Chair, if I may add on to that, well, actually, one of the requirements of our carbon pollution reduction grant is to do a community benefits analysis and a benefits analysis for low-income and disadvantaged communities as part of that work. So it's not just cost alone, but also benefits and shared benefits across that. So in the coming year to 2 years, we'll be digging more into that with our partners across the region about how we quantify that, and our partners at the state of Minnesota who are also trying to figure out how we do that math. But we'll be digging more into that and bringing those conversations to you as well as we're learning more about those benefits and how we can quantify them.
And just a final comment, it really is exciting as we're moving toward our planning, and cities are going to be required to submit their plans on an ongoing basis to think about how these tools impact our ability to do that good planning. And then even down the road, as someone mentioned earlier, I think it was Councilor Johnson, what we require, be a part of the tools that they use. So thank you so very much for this work.
Councilmember Chambliss.
Thank you. Yes, just like all the other council members, this is very exciting. It also looks like it's a fun way to learn about and implement climate action mitigation. I'm very curious about the tool and what the strategy bundle was related to the building energy and how you have forecasted such a significant reduction. That was based on the chart that was on page 10. So by 2040, there was a significant reduction in building energy as compared to 2018.
Yeah. Building energy, Councilmember Chambliss. Building energy is one where we have a big opportunity, especially if the utility does what they say they're gonna do, right? So we have Xcel Energy telling us, we're gonna be this % renewable energy by this date. Now, if they fulfill that promise, that's really good for climate because that means that we're gonna be getting much more renewable energy. And just by that, so you don't really, a community doesn't really have to do much on that, just kind of like make sure that utility fulfills that. Just by that, you're gonna see big reductions. So in this, we were showing an 100% clean electricity assumption. That's a I'll say a very big assumption to make, although it is possible with current existing technologies. So it's a matter of how we work. We continue to work with utilities to make sure that we get most clean energy, but also clean energy that we can produce ourselves through solar, through other distributed energy resources. So I think it is possible, and I think we need to be ambitious with our goals because it's what it's necessary for climate. So a big thing that we have had to balance through this conversation is that really the level of change that needs to happen in society is pretty significant. So how do we convey that without not sounding realistic? So it is a balance of how you actually present this information and what do you say that is realistic. I think all those were things that we had long conversations about, and I don't think there's just one right way to do it.
And I would offer too that in this particular example, it's really dialing everything up to the most, right? Because we know that when you say, well, let's do 20%, that someone's always gonna say, but what would 100% look like? And being able to see that difference and then being able to go and do your cost benefit analysis on, well, what's the difference in cost from 20% to 100%? And is it worth it to make that jump? That's part of the role of the tool is to be able to provide that so that local units of government can decide what choice they want to make, and they get to decide if it's a realistic choice for them or if it's worth that additional cost to go, one level up or the next level up. So we didn't want it to be limiting as a strategy that we thought, well, this is all they will likely do, but really give them the tool to explore that for themselves.
Makes sense, thank you.
Another thing to mention there is that there's electrification as one of the strategies. So whether we like it or not, as long as we continue to burn natural gas for our heat and for our cooking, that's always going to have greenhouse gas emissions, right? So I think the federal government is very involved in this idea of we need to electrify if we really want to meet our climate goals. The building sector, in here in Minnesota, heating is going to be a very important one. The transportation sector with electric cars. So I think those are very important considerations for meeting that ambitious goal.
Great, thank you.
Well, thank you. That is really exciting, and we're really looking forward to following how this is laid out, and we want to be involved. And I think as ambassadors to the community, this is something we can highlight, we can encourage, and we can work with some of our local communities to move it forward. I have one last question. If this gets national attention, which I think it should, is this something we would license to other communities? I mean, is it built into the math, just our 180 communities, or is it something that could be applied to other locations, other metro areas?
Well, Mr. Chair, we're usually not in the business of selling our work because we're a public entity, so we've always been a partner when others have asked, like, can you show us how you do that? We're like, yeah, look under the hood,
Yeah.
take a look. The tool that's built here is customized for these local units of government, what their actual energy data is when we can get it for, their different sectors, what we know about transportation use, what we know about wastewater use. But the math is the math. So the basic functionality of it, that's all something that we always share.
Interesting. Great opportunity. Well, thank you so much. Really exciting. We're looking forward to hearing updates.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Right.
That's very cool.
So we're on to scenario planning and land use. Lisa, are you setting that up as well, or I'm not letting you leave very easily.
Actually, thank you. I would like to say, building off of the conversation that we just had around the regional greenhouse gas emissions inventory tool, that's like, what can we do in the short term? What actions can we take today to make a difference here? When we're thinking now about our 2050 regional planning effort, moving out to 2050, how are we going to get to where we want to get in the next 25 plus years? Not just around climate, but around all of the goals that we've been talking about as a region. So we want to, our staff are going to come talk to you about some of the conversations I know that we've been having in Community Development Committee and at our Land Use Advisory Committee about how we think about managing growth in this region in order to achieve the vision and the goals that you have been working on with us as part of our 2050 Regional Development Guide. So thank you, and I will turn it over to Barish.
Good afternoon. Let me see if I can get this better.
Welcome.
Maybe I'll bring myself closer. My name is Barışka Müştaz, and I work as a planning analyst at the Community Development Division. And I'm here to introduce you to our work in scenario planning, which is a technique that we're using to prepare you for the 2050 Regional Planning Guide. And I'm hoping you'll find it interesting because the technique itself is designed for assisting policymakers at various stages of policymaking. Let's try these. Nope. Yes, here we go. So I will start by describing scenario planning to you. I will also talk about how and why we're using this planning technique. And I'll finally conclude by talking a little bit about the land use implications of this particular method. So scenario planning is a practice that we use for planning for an uncertain future. Usually traditional planning, we do not account for uncertainties. We just look at past premises, past practices, past patterns, and then we project into the future based on the information that we get. In this particular case, we're planning for an uncertain future by looking at by exploring multiple possibilities of what might happen. So we basically ask what-if questions. I will figure this out before the end of this thing. Sorry about that. So we ask what-if questions and try to figure out what the consequences of those what-if scenarios are. And we try to prepare for them so that we can meet the needs of possible different possibilities and be prepared for the future. Going in the wrong direction. All right, so why do we do scenario planning? Some of you might have seen this slide already. My boss previously used it. I thought it was a great slide, so I decided to appropriate it. So just to give you an example of why we do scenario planning, I just pulled a map of Hurricane Katrina's trajectory at 11 a.m. on August 26, 2005. And if you look at this map, basically you see the white area, which is the location or the range of possible places that the hurricane might impact. And in the middle of the white line, you're seeing a black, the white area, you see a black line, which is the hurricane forecast. And this is basically an estimate or a projection of where the hurricane might go, given the best and newest information that we have. So as you can see, at this time, at 11 a.m. in the morning, the hurricane is heading toward the Panhandle, and that's their best estimate at the time. On the edge of the white area, you will see the city of New Orleans, and the city itself is not on direct track of the hurricane at this moment, but it still is within the boundaries of the likely places where the hurricane might touch down. So this is the map itself at 11 p.m. As you can see, the story changed quite a bit, and the hurricane is heading toward New Orleans this time. So the main point that I would like to make when I show you this map is that we need to prepare for a range of possible futures. If we do not do so, we end up bearing the consequences of this. And as you can see in the case of city of New Orleans, they bore the consequences. We usually go for point forecasts, and it's important to consider all the uncertainties associated so that we don't get blindsided by them. So how does this relate to our own forecasts? Basically, we do forecasts in this region pertaining to our regional growth. We look at regional numbers of jobs and population, and we forecasted up until at this point, up until 2050. We also do local forecasts where we try to establish where people and jobs will be located over time. So both of these forecasts, we use these forecasts for I will get this right. We use all of these forecasts for our policy plans, and they make a big difference because we basically base all of our investments, infrastructure investments and services based on those forecasts. So it's important that we get them, and in our case, the forecasts are very much like the black line that you saw on the weather map. We use the best and newest information to try to get the best forecast. But there are uncertainties with the regional forecasts that we have and the local forecasts that we have. And I'd like to talk a little bit about those. For instance, when you look at the regional totals, we do not really, there are lots of uncertainties associated with it, one of them being immigration. We don't really know how many people will be in the region. Immigration is something, national immigration especially, it really is determined to a large extent by our national policy and the overall global economy. So we don't quite know exactly how many people would be here. And when it comes to our local forecasts, we don't really quite know where people would like to settle. The preferences are different, and some decades people settled in more suburban rural areas. In other decades, they prefer to locate in core areas. And telework, especially after the pandemic, really makes the story a little more blurry. We don't quite know if people have jobs and if they work from home, they might locate in different locations than they currently are. So all of those things are things that impact our forecasts. And scenario planning, as we use it in this exercise, helps us to navigate those uncertainties and plan for that white area that we're hoping to plan for. So how do we plan for different regional growth scenarios? Because at the end of the day, this is about that. Our forecasts are regional growth forecasts, and we want to make sure that we get them, we at least incorporate the uncertainties associated with them. So the first uncertainty that we look at is how much does the region grow? This is our regional total forecast. We don't know how many people. We have an idea of how many people will be there, but it's not for certain. On the other side, we don't know where exactly people would be living. So those are the two uncertainties that enter the picture and that we would like to explore. So we start from a baseline scenario, which we call the business as usual scenario. This is a case where we have everything going, we're forecasting everything going the same way it has been going over the last few decades. So it's business as usual, meaning things are going to be continuing the same way they have been. Everything else we do is a comparison to our business as usual case. So we ask the question, what if the region grows more than the business as usual scenario? What if it grows less than that? So if you look at the chart in front of you, on the y-axis, you will see that there is high growth and there is lower growth at the bottom of it. So that's one dimension of the uncertainty that we're exploring. We also ask where this growth will take place. So we ask the question of what if the region grew in a more compact way, meaning in the already developed areas of the region at higher densities and closer to the core of the region in St. Paul and Minneapolis and in the inner ring suburbs surrounding them. And we ask, what if it actually happened in a more dispersed fashion across the second and third ring suburbs and the rural areas of the region? And we just put that on a spectrum as well, and you can see that on the x-axis, we have a spectrum going from a more compact development pattern toward a more dispersed pattern. So in this case, the business as usual is the baseline. It's the sort of the reference case in the middle, and the four quadrants each correspond to a future. And so we have four of them, higher growth, more compact, higher growth, dispersed, lower growth, compact, and lower growth, dispersed. So altogether, we have 5 scenarios that we're working with. So I'd like to show you how these scenarios look on the ground, because they tend to run a little abstractly, and I want to show folks how it looks when you look at the land use maps that we have, or when we look at the maps of the region. In this case, you will see 5 maps, and these maps are, they each represent a future, and they all represent a different pattern of population growth across the region. And in the top right, you will see the business as usual scenario. And when you look at that map, what we hope to see is where the region's population is growing, which areas is the region's population growing at. And so as you can see, there is a relatively balanced distribution of population growth that we're expecting if business as usual pans out. So it has been fairly balanced. 40% of our regional growth has been in the core and the remainder in the suburban and rural areas. So it's a fairly balanced place to start from. If you look at the map, at the middle, top middle map, that shows us the higher growth compact scenario. And as you can see, compared to the business as usual scenario especially, it has a darker concentration in the core. I should have said darker, the darker it is at a point, the higher the population growth in that area. It is actually green, but I don't know if it comes up on the screen as green. The darker spots, the darker green spots show us that in the high compact scenario, we're having more of our population growth happening in the region's core and around Twin Cities and the inner ring suburbs surrounding them. And if you look at the top right map, that shows you the dispersed case, and we see the opposite pattern. There is not much growth in the region's core, and most of the growth is happening in the second and third ring suburbs and the rural areas, and it's kind of like a donut pattern. If you look at the maps in the bottom, they resemble the maps on the top, but they are just lighter shades because there is less growth happening. So I'd like to show you the same map set, this time for employment. So all of these maps show you the pattern of employment growth in the region. The business as usual has a sort of a peculiar pattern to it. You don't have the transportation network built onto it, but if you were to have that, you would see that most of our jobs and job growth is clustered around our railways, highways, and areas that have easy access to highways. So that's a pretty common pattern across other regions as well. You see that same pattern in all 5 scenarios, especially if you look at the middle top and the middle right, top middle and top right maps, which is the higher and compact and higher dispersed maps. Surprising thing is that they really look alike. They're not very different. So you can have a situation where people might be moving to the suburbs or remaining in the cities or in the core of the region, but at the same time, jobs are not moving much. So there is a stability to the geography of jobs that doesn't really seem to be the case when it comes to residential patterns. Once again, the maps in the bottom, they are lighter in shade, and they are just basically, it means that there's not as much employment growth in those particular scenarios.
Can you pause just for a quick question?
Absolutely.
Councilmember.
Very quick, and I may have missed your having said something about this, but as you look at the jobs and talk about the stability of jobs, we are focusing on then those job creators, but are we actually talking about the location of those jobs since COVID and so much working at home? I just have to make sure I'm understanding where we see the job pattern remaining the same in this way. If we're actually talking about the location of the company or the owner of the job, or if we're talking about the location of the employee.
It will be the location of the jobs, not the employee.
Got it.
That's how it is reported by deed. And I should also underline one limitation of this data set, that they actually report jobs at the headquarters. So in some cases, offices might have satellites that we might not be capturing, and all of the jobs are reported at the headquarters.
And so we're thinking about the implications of that as it may factor in on where we're seeing activity and density at a period of time. We're thinking about the job and its location versus the employer and its
Exactly.
location.
I should say, that's a very good question. I should say that in our higher dispersed scenario, we're basically simulating a scenario where people would be living away from the cities, and that could be away from the region's core, that could be an artifact of telework. So we're basically incorporating a pseudo telework scenario with the high dispersed, and that is supposed to capture that. And what we see in this case is that employment is the geography is fairly stable.
Well, thank you. You had already answered that question, and I just needed to put two and two together. I appreciate it.
No worries. So I want to kind of switch gears and talk a little bit in terms of what this whole thing means for land use. And before I start, I want to explain the process through which we explore the land use implications of scenarios. I should start by saying that throughout all of this exercise, we used our own statistical forecast models. And all of our forecast models are based on our existing policies. We're looking at existing comp plans. We're looking at existing transportation network. We're looking at 2040 MUSA boundaries. So none of the simulations that we're doing are wild guesses. Everything is plausible within the range of our existing policies, but they're significantly different enough for us to see to make some plausible explorations. So I should start out by that.
Mr. Chair, just one quick question too, before we get, so I have a question. So, we're looking at the 7-county metro region, but we have a 15-county MSA that overlaps that. So when, looking at my communities, we are a major jobs hub for people that are coming outside of the 7-county metro region. So, when you just look at this scenario, somebody looking at it, you think, okay, here's our region. People are going to be moving within this region, leaving the core, going to the core. But in the case of Plymouth and Maple Grove, and you can even now count Dayton and Minnetonka and all the way down, they are a core. They are a core as well for people that are coming as far from Wilmer and St. Cloud. And so how do you account for that? Because they're all traveling and they're having impacts on transportation and wastewater and the environment and all that. I just, need to understand that, because a lot of these communities, their daytime population goes up, but a lot of it is not people, we know there are people certainly coming from the core out, but we know there are many, many more people that are living in the exurbs or other counties outside. How does that factor into this as we just look at this little area?
Sure. That's a very good question. I think the way I should describe that, and I will get to it in a second, the way we distribute jobs and population across the region uses a real estate model. So UrbanSim is a real estate model where we use market conditions and preferences in conjunction with each other and income levels for people just to incorporate affordability into the mix. And the model distributes jobs and predicts the potential location of jobs and residents. So in that sense, the model is really just simply doing the work of the market, given the limitations that we legally, or I shouldn't say legally, policy-wise in place. And that includes the policies of the cities as well, because we're just operating based on their comp plans. Yeah. So in that sense, if the model is distributing the jobs to those locations, it has all the amenities associated. So Maple Grove and Plymouth, let's say, they have business amenities associated with them. The business model, the real estate model captures that. So we're not really assigning ourselves anything to any other place or calling them core or non-core, but we're just letting the model do the distribution. So it naturally distributes where it goes.
And I think that's good to know, because when we do say the inner city or core or inner ring suburbs that was used, we're talking about geography, but we are not capturing what's going on outside, because the jobs themselves are demonstrating that something is happening. The data is speaking, the model with the data is speaking. For me, I just want to make sure that, there's always this, are people traveling into Minneapolis in the region? Are they now staying, outside? But there's this whole bundle of people that sits outside the 7-county metro area that are interacting here too. And so I just wanted people to know that, because if you're one of those communities out there, you are not necessarily thinking about people in the 7-county area, where are they coming to here, and transportation area, you're thinking about everybody around you that's traveling in. So I just want people to, maybe y'all know that, but that is something that maybe people wouldn't see in a scenario like this, but your explanation makes complete sense.
Glad to hear that.
Thank you.
Just to go back to how we generate this, simulate the scenarios, we start out with our regional economic and demographic model, and Todd is here, he uses that for forecasts. We get the regional totals from him, and we feed those numbers into our land use model called Urban Sim. And what Urban Sim does is basically, it is a real estate model, and it just distributes those jobs and households across the region, and those are our local forecasts, basically. And the numbers that come out of Urban Sim is not just numbers of people and jobs, but for each combination of households and employment, they're taking up certain amount of land. So that's where the land use piece comes up. Since it's a land use model, we are able to get certain outcomes out of that. For instance, wherever they are, they're using some land in terms of, taking acres of residential areas or taking acres of commercial areas. They have certain densities associated with them. And sometimes they just, involve change of land use. So we move from, let's say, residential to agricultural use, or vice versa. So in that sense, all of these all these forecasts that we have, it has land use implications. And I would like to talk a little bit about those land use implications, because that's one of the policy areas that we have quite a bit of muscle, and I think that you would find some of these interesting because they impact our systems. So we picked 3 land use measures. These are fairly simple, but they have quite a bit of significance from the point of view of our systems. First, we looked at land consumed, and we measured that by looking at total acres of land developed. And this is important because it impacts our natural systems, and it also impacts our transportation network. We also chose the density of land use, and as you well know, density plays a really important role in terms of our housing policies as well as our wastewater policy. And finally, we chose the amount of agricultural land developed, and this is also very important for our economy. Agricultural sector is an important part of our economy, and it's also an important part, an important component of our water quality, the quality of our water resources. So I will show you some charts, but don't be afraid, I will not go through them. I'll just give you the takeaways in the interest of time. So both of these charts show the land use outcomes of our different scenarios. So for each scenario, in the first one, we're looking at how many acres of additional land has been developed in each scenario. And in the second case, you're looking at the average acres of land used per household, which is the inverse of density. So that particular chart really shows you how dense development is. So as I said, I won't go over the charts, but the main points are, in compact futures, we're using less land regardless of, we're developing less land regardless of how much growth we're experiencing in the region. And in a similar line, for compact futures, we're seeing a more denser development pattern. It's not very surprising, but it is reassuring to hear that that's what our expectations are confirmed. So compact growth patterns are showing denser development, again, regardless of how much the region grows. And the last measure that I have is the total acres of agricultural land lost to development. And the upshot of this chart is that more agricultural land is developed under dispersed scenarios. And again, this is regardless of how much we grow. So it puts additional pressure on our agricultural assets. So just to reiterate these land use findings, we're basically saying that if we grow compactly, we use land more intensely and efficiently. And also, if we grow in a more dispersed fashion, we are losing more agricultural land compared to a more compact scenario. So we do have more pressure on our agricultural resources. So why do these findings matter? I just want to bring it to a more abstract level and kind of prepare you to talk about policy a little bit. These findings matter because they have a bearing on our regional goals. And the table that you look at kind of shows the relationship between the measures that we used and the draft regional goals that you have endorsed a while back. I'm not quite sure how sealed that deal is, but at least at this point, we're considering them as draft regional goals. And we're just trying to show the connection between those working regional goals and the measures. And if you look at this table, each check mark shows a specific relation between a measure and a regional goal. And in this particular case, I would like you to look at the top right check mark, and that is that shows the relation between the total acres of land developed and the restoration and protection of natural systems. Based on the findings, we are able to say that the more land is developed, the likelier it is to enrich our natural resources. And when you think about the connection between the two, we can make assertions about what kinds of development patterns might impact our goals directly. And this provides a certain context for your policy decisions. If you understand the relations behind our measures or our strategies, then you can see the connection between our goals and what we're measuring. So it's going to give you some information to be able to judge how we're moving toward our goals. So based on our assessment of the data, the question becomes one of, especially when it comes to natural assets, what do we do about protecting and restoring our natural systems when we don't know if we're going to develop in a compact or dispersed fashion? That's the kind of policy question that will come before you. And we are hoping that we could provide the information for you to be able to make these policy decisions in an informed fashion.
Mr. Chair, just briefly again, if I may. So I appreciate this. I think where I struggle from my real life experience is that in part of my district, I still have greenfield and farm development. I will say there, throughout our state and this country and the world, there are agricultural lands that are polluting. They are not farming properly, and they're causing great destruction to natural environments. I will also say that when development comes in, there are rigid standards, like with the Clean Water Act and all the other things that are put in place, where you can actually take polluted land, and when you're done with it, you'll have a development that is putting dirty water into a inert pond and letting it settle out before it gets into the watershed and everything's being managed. I mean, those were some of the priorities of at least my city, and I know many cities, probably all cities, across this region, including the core cities and the exurbs. So I'm just, I'm not trying to challenge this, but in reality, to just say, well, if farmland remains there, the natural environment is doing well. Well, I've seen just the opposite. And to say that if there's dispersed development, again, just saying, there are communities that we're not capturing here, that if we don't have some development in the suburbs and exurbs, people are just driving further to get to those job centers. And then there are impacts in the 15-county region, outside of our 7-county region, that we're not, I don't think, accounting for. Mm-hmm. So when I worked at Greater MSP, it was always the 15-county, I think 16 at one point. Then we dropped a county based on population estimates. And, those were the places that we were looking at those agricultural assets and things like that, realizing that the 7-county metro area is going to be urbanized. It's planned to be urbanized, and we're continuing to grow. 50 years ago, it doesn't look like it looks today. We've gotten much smarter with how we develop. So I'm just hoping in my role here, we continue to work with cities like the tool we saw earlier, the tools about increasing shade and all of those things. But I just want to make sure that for some of us who've been in the trenches on this type of development, that there are examples, many examples out there where you take a piece of property And whether it's developed at a high density or low density, you can actually create the runoff in situation that is better than you found it, especially if it was industrial and contaminated, which there's a site that's taking place in Plymouth right now that'll be much better when it's done, but it's open right now. So I just want council to know that, because there are just scenarios that don't necessarily fit into the nice boxes that we've got here. But I think overall, I really understand where you're going. But when you've been on a city council that have seen thousands of development proposals come through, and you're trying to meet all the regulations that you need to, you can actually, I believe, have better outcomes. And now with the help of Met Council and the tools, even better outcomes. So I just wanted to put that out there, because it's moving us down a path, and I just want people to know that there are going to be some, I think, exceptions to the rule or the assumptions, with all due respect.
No, I'm very glad
okay.
that, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I'm very glad that you brought that up, because I think in a CDC presentation, I think some of my colleagues made some points that drew similar remarks from you, which actually encouraged us to investigate certain things as well. And some of the areas that you mentioned in terms of, for instance, the fragmentation of natural systems based on development, we're conducting some research, and we're hoping to get back to you with that. And also, I was by no means trying to prescribe anything in here. It's more like this was an example to show the trade-offs that we have. And you will see my colleagues from water resources will come in here, and they will be talking, for instance, in the case of agriculture, it might conversion of agricultural land into development. In some cases, it could actually impact nitrates in a positive way. Mm-hmm. So there will be cases like that, but in terms of chloride, it would do the exact opposite. Our job as staff in here is we just want to be able to provide all the information for you so that you can look at the trade-offs and make data-oriented or data-based decisions. So I hope that helps.
That does help, and I'll just keep providing the real-life experiences, and they come together. They do come together. But it's just, I will tell you, there are communities out there that's the kind of stuff that might raise the hair on the back of their neck a little bit, because they are working very hard with their development plans and their comp plans, and these are data-based, but boy, oh boy, oh boy, are there a lot of exceptions to this. I just put that out there, just as a positive comment to the council.
So I'm just doing a little time check, because we have another presentation after this, and I know this is a robust conversation where people have comments, and I know Councilmember Cedarberg had her hand up, as did Councilmember Bento. So if you all don't mind going a little bit over, it would really be good to get to this population. I'm looking for Lisa to tell us how much time that will take, but I'm also respectful of people's times.
I have one slide left.
Yes, I know. Go ahead.
So would you like me to continue?
Yeah. I think we should try to continue. I'm just
very
saying everybody be mindful that we want to respect this, because this is really important work. Mm-hmm. But also, I want to make sure we don't lose the population opportunity. Go ahead. Sorry.
Ahead, right. So I want to bring this back to how this whole scenario analysis ties back to policy development, because I think that's where most of the interest lies. And the scenario planning work has two phases, really. One of them is the analysis phase. The other one is the policy phase. And in the analysis phase, we tried to answer three questions. And the first question we asked was, how might the region's growth vary? And I described to you in detail how we simulated 5 different futures, and based on that, we tried to come up with futures that are plausible but significant. And in the second case, in the second question, we are basically exploring how these scenarios would impact our region. And today I started talking about the land use piece of it, but we would be coming back here with transportation, wastewater, climate, regional parks, all of these policy areas. We will be coming back to you to talk about how these scenarios impact those systems. In the third question, basically, what I've done in the last table, that's what we intend to do for all of our policy areas. We want you to see the measures that we collected that measure certain important aspects of our systems, And we would like you to understand how those impacts are related to our regional values and vision, because that's the part where you will be beginning to have some policy conversations. So in a way, the scenario results and its intersection with the regional goals and values really does provide the context for you. And in the analysis phase, we will provide that final piece for you, and that will prepare the fourth piece, which is the policy piece. And in the policy piece, we're really looking at a key question, which is what do we do with, what policies do we need to achieve our vision in the face of all these uncertainties? So your questions, your information, and the data that we will provide to you hopefully will inform the context of this conversation. And we're hoping that this will be basically impacting or giving us to staff some guidance as to how we should think about policies going into the future as we draft the regional plan, the policy plans. And in some cases, there might be some conflicts among policies, and this information is supposed to give you the information, provide you the context so that you can actually use the data to try to resolve the conflicts or see the trade-offs between different policies. So I'll just wrap up by just telling you that we've been having some of these conversations, and LULAC and CDC, we had some presentations to the Transportation Policy Working Group and MPAS. So we're hoping that we could bring this whole show back to you, and hoping that this will be the first of many meetings about scenario planning and different policy areas. And we're also hoping that this will inform your policy conversations going forward. We intend to provide a platform for that. As you can see, it informs our forecasting work. So sorry to take so much of your time, and I appreciate the attention, and I'm happy to take questions or comments.
Sure, and I know we have at least two. Go ahead, Gail.
Okay, so I'll just have a comment, and whether we answer it or not, maybe we come back and address it later. But you talked about how this is a statistical forecast modeling, and typically with these statistical forecast modelers, there's uncertainty built into these segments. And so it makes me nervous when your graphs have 110,900 acres of land, because you really have some confidence level as to how that is dispersed, what that number is. Is you have confidence on that number, or is it low confidence over a range of numbers? And then when you're combining things from a statistical forecast modeling, and you're adding one thing to another that has uncertainty, that has another thing to uncertainty, that has another thing to uncertainty, the uncertainty at the end can be very large. And so I think that, for me, I think we can address it later and get a different presentation on it. But I think that that needs to be talked about and discussed, and coming up with a number, to me, isn't enough. It's really, some of these numbers overlap, and what is your confidence, and is there really a difference based on the statistics, especially when you're adding lots of numbers and combining and combining. So I'll leave it there, and there's probably not room to answer, but I think that's a critical part of any kind of modeling and planning, and I come from a background, 30 years of modeling, so I'm not coming from not knowing that,
Right.
so.
No, we'd be happy to provide
Okay, so we can,
any information that you need separately as well. We'll be happy to do that.
but we can talk about it, and then maybe when we come back to the council, we can show it there.
Yeah, so everyone
Yeah, Councilmember Cameron.
Yeah, as the other researcher on the council, the Councilmember Cedarberg read my mind, and I think, the concern for me builds, and I shouldn't frame it as a concern, I just want to verify that, you're building the modeling off of the forecasting, which I have no doubt that Todd does a great job in that forecast, but what guardrails are we putting into place so that we're not getting some artifacts in the data from building that modeling off the forecasting, so that we're providing the best data possible in the analysis that we're presenting for all of these other than policies that we're building off of it. So just thinking about that.
I appreciate that, yeah. No, I think it's important to make sure that the reason we use the forecast models is because we want to start from a realistic point of view, and that's the best and the newest we have available. But obviously, every model has its limitations, and we'd be more than happy to discuss anything you would like to hear.
Well, thank you so much, Chris, and this is really important information, and I know you'll be back to talk about the other kind of, part of the development guides and the
Yes, you'll be
scenario
seeing
planning
me
is involved.
quite a bit.
Thank you so
All
much.
right, thank you so much, appreciate that. And now I know Matt Schroeder's been very patient, but we want to give you an opportunity to make your presentation. Bumps in the road, any planning
Sounds interesting.
PowerPoint that starts with bumps in the road has our interest, so.
It does. That was not intentional, but yeah, I'm glad it grabbed your attention because this is, really going to yank you back to the present from these dreams of the future. I am Matt Schroeder. I use him, he, him pronouns I'm just here to continue Research Fest at the council meeting. So we'll be talking about the 2022 population estimates, which just wrapped up. This is an annual process that I'll talk about in a minute. But I really want to start in line with Councilmember Cedarberg's and Councilmember Cameron's comments with this mindset that estimating is what you do when you don't know, which may seem kind of trite, but talking about not knowing, nobody really knows what the population is of the region at any given point in time. People are being born, people are dying, people are moving around all the time. And so not we, not the Census Bureau, not even Google or Facebook know how many people live in the region at any one time. All we can take is our best, most educated guess based on the best available data to us. So with that in mind, I'll talk a bit about our whole population estimates process for those of you who are new to the council. And talk about those bumps in the road, which are basically slower growth and less balanced growth, less even growth. Perhaps a strained metaphor, but needed a title. And then to talk about why that's happening. Why is growth slower and less even? Then to talk about a bit about the Metropolitan Council and the Census Bureau estimates, which you may have read about in the paper. And then look ahead to what estimates might show for next year. So looking a little bit ahead in time. So to talk first about what estimates are and are not, you've probably heard of the decennial census, the American Community Survey. Both of these are from the Census Bureau, and then our population estimates. The decennial census is a complete count of people. We just, relatively recently had it, the 2020 census. Happens every 10 years, and really doesn't give us much information, just age, sex, race, Hispanic or Latino origin, household type, and whether people rent or own their homes. The American Community Survey, in contrast, is, we get new data every year. It has a lot richer characteristics like income, education, disability status, and so on. And that is based on a sample. But population estimates are something of a blend of those two in some ways. They are like the American Community Survey conducted every year. They are also, like the decennial census, not really talking a whole lot about the characteristics of the population, but they are trying to give us the best approximation of the population, much like, so something like census light, maybe, as opposed to really digging into the richness of the variety of people that we have in the region. And all of those, as you've just heard, combined with many, many, many other inputs and many complex methods to create the forecasts. This is a frequent point of confusion, the difference between estimates and forecasts. So just wanted to emphasize that here. We're looking at the, again, very recent past, in this case, 2022. And this is really a collaborative program that we have. We do the population estimates for the 7-county Twin Cities region. The State Demographic Center does the estimates for greater Minnesota, outside our 7-county region. And then local governments are really, really a key partner in supplying data, in reviewing and commenting on our preliminary estimates. And so really, we cannot do what we do without them, without local governments. The timeline for these estimates is set out in state law. This is something that we do as directed by state law. So by June 1st, we need to produce preliminary estimates. Those go out to local governments in the form of emails and paper mailings. They get detailed reports. We post spreadsheets on our website. So basically trying to disseminate these in a lot of different formats. Local governments then have, according to statute, about 3 weeks. In practice this year, about 4 weeks to submit challenges and comments to those estimates. This year, we got 4 comments which were really resolved more by answering questions. 4 other comments were resolved with edits, mainly based on the cities correcting the building permit data that they had submitted to us. And then by July 15th, in practice earlier this week, we need to certify the final estimates and send them to the Department of Revenue, the State Demographic Center, and MnDOT for use in allocating certain forms of state funding, like local government aid and state aid for local transportation at MnDOT and Fiscal Disparities Act funding. They're used as one input into regional parks funding as well, closer to home at the Met Council. But we also know that cities have their own uses, like allocating liquor licenses or potentially road signs for local streets. When we're doing all this, though, we're really trying to balance 4 things. One is fairness. We want to treat each community equally because these are used for allocating funding. We don't want to do something for one community that we wouldn't for another. We also want to, at the same time, be responsive to local concerns. And because, a lot of times cities and townships will have data that we just don't have available to us for the entire region. We want to be accurate, of course, which in this case, given the uncertainty around estimates, means that we're really trying to use tried and true methods, typical demographic methods, to estimate the population, but also to be transparent, where we don't want there to be a situation where non-experts like local government staff or you all or average citizens can't understand what we're trying to do, since that's important for accountability too. So you can see the tensions, I think, among these 4 things, but I think we're really just trying to do a balancing act here. And how we do that is what's called the housing unit method. So as I said, people are born and die and move around all the time. And we can't really track that at the local level with any degree of certainty. But we do have a really good idea based on the 2020 census and on the building permits that cities and townships report to us of how many housing units there are in the region. And so we can use what we know about those housing units to estimate the population. So first applying occupancy rates to those housing units to figure out how many of those units are occupied, that is the number of households. And then we can use what we know about average household sizes, persons per household, to get from households to the number of people living in those households. And then we can add on the population in group quarters. These are places like state prisons, college dormitories, nursing homes, places that aren't really part of the typical housing market that we get a lot of other data on to get to the total population. You may be wondering what the difference is between the green and blue here. The green is things that we get from our own data collection or from the 2020 census housing unit counts. But we do collect building permit data, we collect manufactured housing data, and then the group quarters data as well. We try to get a count from all those facilities every year. So should definitely acknowledge my colleague Joel Nias, who conducts a lot of that work and really works closely with local cities and townships to get those numbers. But moving in then to what those estimates show. As a result of all this, I want to just preface this by saying that the key lesson, I think, from the 2010 to 2020 decade that we recently completed was steady population growth. So we added about 313,500 people between 2010 and 2020, again, as best as the Census Bureau can do, about 11% growth rate. And now, again, with apologies for the unwarranted precision, but this is what we have to do, we have about 3.197 million people in the region as of April 1st, 2022. So you may be noticing that 34,000 person increase since the 2020 census over 2 years, and be comparing that to the 313,000 people, so on average 31,000 people per year that we added in the previous decade, and notice that, wow, growth is really slow compared to last decade, and that is definitely true. So on average, over the past 2 years, according to our estimates, the region has added about 17,000 people per year, compared to, again, that about 31,000 people per year in the previous decade. And I mean, looking at this in historical context, it's relatively low. You'd have to go back to the 1970s, in our region at least, to find a decade in which we grew more slowly than that. I should add, too, that the 2010s started out this way as well, as we were coming out of the Great Recession. So again, it's difficult to tell whether, you know, these bumps in the road are temporary, whether the road will smooth out, or whether, given that the dynamics now are very different from how they were at the beginning of the 2010s, whether this will continue. And that kind of points the way toward that second bump that I mentioned, the unevenness of the growth over the past couple years. So darker shades of green here show cities that have added more people per year, according to our estimates. And the brown shades here show cities that we've estimated to have lost population since 2020. The 10 cities that have added the most people are labeled here as along with Minneapolis and St. Paul. For context, though Minneapolis was, in fact, the biggest gainer of population by numbers over the past couple years. To go back, if you imagine overlaying those Thrive MSP 2040 community designations on these, the urban center, urban, suburban, and so on, overlaying them on this map and then adding them all up, you would get to this chart, which shows more clearly, I think, the more uneven, less balanced nature of that population growth over the past couple of years. So, we can see the urban and urban center communities here more in orange, and suburban as well. And then this paler yellow here is the emerging suburban edge and suburban edge. So really in contrast to the previous decade where we were seeing, you know, roughly equal shares of growth go to the urban center, the urban and suburban communities, and then the emerging suburban edge and suburban edge communities. With some, of course, going to the rural areas as well, we're seeing that much more of this growth is going to the emerging suburban edge, the developing edge of the region, which in fact has not slowed down at all since the past decade. So despite that overall regional slowing of growth, things are proceeding apace in that developing edge of the region.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah.
It's a quick question on the slide, please. Thanks. What would a spatially balanced bar graph look like? What would this look like if it were really spatially balanced? Would they all be equal or more growth in the urban centers?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, Councilmember Lilligren, thank you for the question. I guess technically you could think about it in terms of each city and township having the same growth rate. Okay. From time point A to time point B. Okay. In this case, it's thinking about it from a larger level perspective in where is the region's growth going. I think these community designation breakdowns are a helpful way to think about it. But what I meant by the relatively even nature of growth was just that the urban center was getting about as much growth as the urban and suburban populations, which was getting almost as much growth as the emerging suburban edge and suburban edge group. So really just from a higher level perspective, looking at where those people are, where the population is changing.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I do not, again, want to make too much of this pattern. It is a definite pattern that we're noticing, but I want to temper that slightly by not oversimplifying it, because between Minneapolis and Bloomington, those two cities accounted for about a quarter of the region's population growth over the past couple years. As I said, Minneapolis was the leader in growth, adding somewhere around 6,000 people. So really, they are still adding people. This is not a case where the urban center is completely hollowing out. St. Paul is, according to our estimates, losing a little bit of population, but is still looking at it in percentage terms, holding roughly steady. So I don't want to oversimplify this by saying that the urban core is bleeding population and it's all going to the developing edge. And really here, I think to your question, Councilmember Lilligren, this kind of gets at the less even nature of that growth. These are showing those growth rates between 2010 and 2020. Darker shades of green, higher growth rates, shades of brown, a loss of population or no change. So really only a handful of cities and townships having an estimate loss of population according to the census in the previous decade. In this decade, the first couple of years, you really see how the values here are more extreme. You're seeing more very dark greens and more, brown shades. So a lot more cities and townships are losing population. And those that are gaining tend to be doing so more slowly, while those cities, especially the ones that are labeled, such as the northwestern suburbs of Hennepin County, Dayton, Rogers, and into Corcoran. Sorry, wish I could read that better.
Corcoran's above Medina.
I'm sorry?
Corcoran's above Medina. Is that what you were looking?
The city that's immediately west of Maple Grove, which I think is Corcoran.
It's west of Plymouth.
Okay.
And Maple
But
Grove, yes.
the overall conclusion, I think, just the much more uneven pattern of growth. So then to talk about why that's been, just a quick refresher, these are the main levers that affect the population estimates, so moving through those. It's not really about the number of housing units. We're still seeing record numbers of housing units being built. I put the 2022 permits in a lighter shade here because those did not count toward this year's estimates, but will count toward next year's estimates. And apartments in the pipeline are still opening. We're still seeing a lot of platting activity, as I think some of you heard in the plat monitoring survey presentation a month or two ago. And so housing construction really is continuing to happen. But what we are seeing is that the occupancy rates are declining. This is particularly true among the multifamily units. So we've added about 42,700 housing units since 2020, and about 29,000 households. So more housing units than households, our occupancy rates are going down. And then we can think too about those, the COVID effect on household sizes. So you can think about one portion of population change being due to natural increase, so births minus deaths, which again isn't something that we really have data on at the local level, but region-wide I think is useful to think about here. Before COVID, before 2020, we were averaging about 39,000 births per year and 29,000 deaths per year. 21,000 deaths per year. So our net change due to natural increase was about 18,000 per year. After that, over the past couple of years, we have fewer births, more deaths, and so our net change due to natural increase is only about 11,000 people per year. So the amount of people that we're adding per year only due to births and deaths, not considering any migration effects at all, is lower by close to about 6,500 people per year. We can also look at that group quarters population, and this has recovered substantially since last year when we were really seeing just that the dormitory population in colleges and universities had not recovered. This year it has, but it is still down relative to 2020, as well as the state prison population. So again, these are at least some of the factors that we're seeing that are moving the population estimates in the direction that they have. To talk briefly then about the Census Bureau's population estimates, they use different data, different methods, and so based on those, they've estimated about a 1.7% population loss for Hennepin County between 2020 and 2022, and a 2.9% loss for Ramsey County, which again is difficult to reconcile with the rapid pace of housing development. Other data that we're seeing is showing that, given that rapid pace of housing development, you'd have to see a large crash in occupancy rates to have population losses of this magnitude, which is not what we're seeing in other data, not that rapid a decline. So you may have seen this article then in the Star Tribune. Is this the end of the Minneapolis and St. Paul population boom? Based on those estimates, and it was a pretty nuanced article that also talked about our estimates and everything. So I put this up here not to knock that article, but more to provide context for how this is playing out. The main cause of this population loss, according to the Census Bureau, was a large increase in migration out of Hennepin and Ramsey counties. But we can also look at Postal Service data on change of addresses, and again, not perfect data, there's no perfect data on migration, but it is showing an increase in out-migration, but not nearly as large as the Census Bureau's data is showing. So again, different data, different methods, different results, but there is some larger context here that I think is important to consider. So then, looking ahead to this point next year, what might the 2023 population estimates show? It is possible that things will turn around, that, again, given our ongoing record housing construction, our death rates are still declining, particularly since 2022. So the fewer deaths may mitigate that slower growth. On the other hand, we are seeing a continued decline in multifamily occupancy rates. There has been a bit of a drop-off in single-family building permits. And then, of course, there's the possible recession and the cooling of the homeownership market, though, to be honest, that phrase appeared in these slides last year as well. So we'll still see. I know it's always on the horizon, but again, many unknowns, which again, I think are important to keep in mind. And then just some wild cards, like how developers will respond to shifts in housing policy, broader public health effects, new viruses or shifts in the pandemic, as well as things that we've heard about today, the effects of climate change. So again, some real wild cards that really point again, just to bring us back to the need for, I guess, humility in constructing population estimates. We need to do it. We have, I think, a pretty good idea. Our estimates were fairly comparable region-wide to what the 2020 census showed. But again, I mean, there are so many unknowns. It is very hard to say anything with certainty about what next year might look like. So with that, I will wrap up and happy to answer whatever questions you have either now or through email, since I know that it's getting late. I'm fine staying as long as you like, but I know that many of us have things to do.
A couple of questions, if we can always email you. And Matt, by the way, you've been wonderful, and just to sing out your praises, you wonder how all those district remaps happen so quickly. There's a deep research engine in the Met Council, and it's sitting right here.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do. Todd Graham deserves the credit for those redistricting maps, but I thank you for your
Thanks. Oh, that's right. Tony, did you?
Thank you so much. You mentioned the feedback from communities, questions that they had asked and corrections that they were able to provide. Were there any sets of comments that might be shared as reflective of their perspective on reasons or, things that had happened that may have caused the fluctuations that they saw, that can be shared back with us.
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Carter, that is a really good question. As I said, most of them, were correcting their permit data that they had originally submitted to us. More broadly, I mean, because as you saw, so many communities did, according to our estimates, lose population, and no local government wants to see that. In addition to the funding implications, which are, well, you'd have to ask the Department of Revenue and MnDOT to figure out how that plays out. There are reputational impacts as well. And so I think, there is a lot of concern out there. But again, I think some communities do have local data on utility hookups that can shed light on occupancy rates. But overall, I mean, when communities talk about dynamics in their housing markets or things that they've noticed, it is occasionally anecdotal. And so it's tough to know what to do with that. So when they're talking about estimates, it's, we need to kind of get back into those levers of housing units and occupancy rates and average household sizes, which occasionally, again, they do have some local data on, and especially the smaller communities have, I think it's just possible for them to have a much more closer read on how things are happening locally.
Just one more follow-up, please.
Sure.
Thank you for sharing back those thoughts. I know that we're all searching for how we get back to the kind of growth that we saw before. And when you speak about slower, unbalanced, I just want to tease out that adjective a little bit to understand that unbalanced means different, and dynamic across rather than even across our region. Is that correct?
Yes, I think I would say that's accurate.
Up and down in different areas or mostly down, right?
Yeah, most areas, I guess, I would say that most cities and townships shared in that regional growth in the previous decade. It's been much more of a mix of gainers and losers. That term should probably not have come out of my mouth, but much more of a mix of cities that have gained population and cities that have not.
Thank you.
Wendy.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll try to be quick. Of course, I had to click the link at the end and dig deep into the tables of data. What happened in Brooklyn Park?
Brooklyn Park, for them, I mean, and this, I think, gets back to Councilmember Carter's question, too. When communities had questions, it was mainly like things like we've added a lot of housing units. Why have we not experienced population growth? In Brooklyn Park's case, I don't think, have added nearly as many housing units as they had in the previous decade. And so those demographic headwinds of the declining birth rates, the increasing death rates, those can be kind of compensated for with additional housing production. But again, if I remember right, this data would be on our website. I don't think they had built as much new housing in the past couple of years as they had in the previous decade.
And a decrease in occupancy, too. They lost 111 households, so, yeah. It was kind of an outlier in the data, so I just wondered if there was anything interesting with that, but thank you.
Yes, thank you. It was one of the, I think the larger declines. Though again, I mean, according to the Census Bureau, I think our estimates for Brooklyn Park came in higher than the Census Bureau's did. So again, there's some, pointing to the uncertainty there.
Well, if you had to lay a bet, we're voting on you, not the Census Bureau, so thank you.
Thank you. That's a lot of pressure. I mean, again, though, we cannot do what we do without the Census Bureau.
Right.
And so, again, they need a method that works for the entire country, and we are able to consider a lot more locally specific data that just does not work for the rest of the country.
Well, I really appreciate your time here. Judy, did you have
Yeah,
something?
just a brief, with the population spurts, like, so you can see the baby boom, then you can see the boomerangs, and then, I don't know about everybody out there, but it seems like there's a lower birth, kids having birth or giving birth, this next population than there was in the past, they're waiting before longer. I mean, does that all has to be factored in here somehow, right? I mean, is that part of it when you see the spikes and the dips?
Yeah, birth rates have been declining. Even before COVID, they were declining. And so, yeah, I mean, I imagine that you've seen in forecasting presentations the bulges in the population pyramid. And so, yeah, I mean, I think yes, the trends that you've noted are at work here too. Especially, given that the millennials are now, I think, have moved out of their parents' houses. Yeah. It's safe to say. Well, there is some evidence, at least, that in the past few years, there has been, an uptick in that. So, all that is at work here. Yeah.
And I just, again, at Greater Mesquite, it was fun to work there because we'd look at, we were trying to attract and retain workers, and we had a whole plan around that, and Met Council was very helpful in all of that. And, again, it would be easy to look at that map and go, okay, well, maybe they're moving into Dakota County, or maybe they're moving out, well, they could be moving out into those other collar counties too, right? And so I'm just always, it was fun getting 15 counties worth of data because you could see, oh, there's a bigger thing going on here. And here, we just kind of stop at our edge, understandably, but, there's a lot of data out there from the real estate industry that says, yep, they're moving on out, and they're taking drives into that outer ring where there are jobs there too, because it's another pattern of a generation doing stuff. But that's obviously, we're not tracking those cities. I happen to meet with some of them on a meeting that I do monthly that are just outside, and you can hear they're building and they're going like crazy right now, but we're not capturing that. So for somebody, in the western suburbs, it's not that far for them to just go 10 minutes up Highway 55 and get a much more affordable home.
Mm-hmm. And that's something that the State Demographic Center would be tracking. And we do collaborate with them.
Yeah, okay.
But always looking for more data sources, though, including from the
Well, I
state
want to thank
industry.
everybody for staying late. I appreciate that we've already lost a few, but Matt, thank you so much.
I appreciate it.
Just a couple of quick things. One is next week, because we're actually deferring on a couple of items, there is no presentations for the Committee of the Whole. So it's summer. We're going to actually cancel next week's meeting on Wednesday, but we'll have plenty to do next week, so don't feel like we won't have time together.
And next week is the retreat.
Correct.
Okay,
The other is, well, do you have anything, Mr. Regional Administrator?
No, nothing to report.
To Chief Counsel? The faces keep changing. What's going on? Dave?
No, sir.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you all for being here late, and this meeting's adjourned.